As she was about to rise, he flung himself at her feet and buried his head in her lap. She stayed stock-still, transfixed. She felt his hot breath on her fingers, the stiff bristles of his muzzle grazing her skin, the rough lapping of his tongue, and then, with a flood of compassion, understood. All he is doing is kissing my hands. He drew back his head and gazed at her with his green, inscrutable eyes, in which she saw her face repeated twice, as small as if it were in bud. Then, without another word, he sprang from the room, and she saw, with an indescribable shock, he went on all fours. Next day, all day, the hills on which the snow still settled echoed with the beast's rumbling roar. "Has master gone hunting?" Beauty asked the spaniel. But the spaniel growled almost bad-temperedly, as if to say that she would not have answered even if she could have. Beauty would pass the day in her sweet reading, or perhaps doing a little embroidery. A box of colored silks and a frame had been provided for her. Or, well wrapped up, she wandered in the walled garden among the leafless roses, with the spaniel at her heels, and did a little raking and rearranging. An idle, restful time, a holiday. The enchantment of that bright, sad, pretty place enveloped her, and she found that, against all her expectations, she was happy there. She no longer felt the slightest apprehension at her nightly interviews with the beast. All the natural laws of the world were held in suspension here, where an army of invisibles tenderly waited on her, and she would talk with the lion, under the patient chaperonage of the brown-eyed dog, on the nature of the moon and its borrowed light, about the stars and the substances of which they were made, about the variable transformations of the weather. Yet still his strangeness made her shiver, and when he helplessly fell before her to kiss her hands, as he did every night when they parted, she would retreat nervously into her skin, flinching at his touch. The telephone shrilled, for her. Her father. Such news. The beast sunk his great head onto his paws. "You will come back to me? It will be lonely here without you." She was moved almost to tears that he should care for her so. It was in her heart to drop a kiss upon his shaggy mane, but, though she stretched out her hand towards him, she could not bring herself to touch him of her own free will. He was so different from herself. "But yes," she said, "I will come back. Soon, before the winter is over." Then the taxi came and took her away. You are never at the mercy of the elements in London, where the huddled warmth of humanity melts the snow before it has time to settle. And her father was as good as rich again, since his hirsute friends' lawyers had the business so well in hand that his credit brought them nothing but the best. A resplendent hotel, the opera theaters, a whole new wardrobe for his darling so she could step out on his arm to parties, to receptions, to restaurants, and life was as she had never known it, for her father had ruined himself before her birth killed her mother. Although the beast was the source of this newfound prosperity and they talked of him often, now that they were so far away from the timeless spell of his house, it seemed to possess the radiant and finite quality of dream, and the beast himself so monstrous, so benign, some kind of spirit of good fortune who had smiled on them and let them go. She sent him flowers, white roses, in return for the ones he had given her, and when she left the florist she experienced a sudden sense of perfect freedom, as if she had just escaped from an unknown danger, had been graced by the possibility of some change, but finally left intact. Yet with this exhilaration, a desolating emptiness. But her father was waiting for her at the hotel. They had planned a delicious expedition to buy her furs, and she was as eager for the treat as any girl might be. Since the flowers in the shop were the same all the year round, nothing in the window could tell her that winter had almost gone. Returning late from supper after the theater, she took off her earrings in front of the mirror. Beauty. She smiled at herself with satisfaction. She was learning, at the end of her adolescence, how to be a spoiled child, and that pearly skin of hers was plumping out, a little, with high living and compliments. A certain inwardness was beginning to transform the lines around her mouth, those signatures of the personality, and her sweetness and her gravity could sometimes turn a mite petulant when things went not quite as she wanted them to go. You could not have said that her freshness was fading, but she smiled at herself in mirrors a little too often these days, and the face that smiled back was not quite the one she had seen contained in the beast's agate eyes. Her face was acquiring, instead of beauty, a lacquer of the invincible prettiness that characterizes certain pampered, exquisite, expensive cats. The soft wind of spring breathed in from the nearby park through the open windows. She did not know why it made her want to cry. There was a sudden, urgent, scrabbling sound as of claws at her door. Her trance before the mirror broke. All at once she remembered everything perfectly. Spring was here and she had broken her promise. Now the beast himself had come in pursuit of her, First she was frightened of his anger. Then mysteriously joyful she ran to open the door. But it was his liver and white spotted spaniel who hurled herself into the girl's arms in a flurry of little barks and gruff murmurings, of whimpering and relief. Yet where was the well-brushed jeweled dog who had sat beside her embroidery frame in the parlor with birds of paradise nodding on the walls? This one's fringed ears were matted with mud, her coat was dusty and snarled, she was thin as a dog that has walked a long way, and if she had not been a dog she would have been in tears. After that first rapturous greeting, she did not wait for Beauty to order her food and water. She seized the chiffon hem of her evening dress, whimpered and tugged. Threw back her head, howled, then tugged and whimpered again. There was a slow, late train that would take her to the station where she had left for London 3 months ago. Beauty scribbled a note for her father, threw a coat round her shoulders. Quickly, quickly, urged the spaniel soundlessly, and Beauty knew the beast was dying. In the thick dark before dawn, the station master roused a sleepy driver for her. Fast as you can. It seemed December still possessed his garden. The ground was hard as iron. The skirts of the dark cypress moved on the chill wind with a mournful rustle, and there were no green shoots on the roses, as if, this year, they would not bloom. And not one light in any of the windows, only in the topmost attic, the faintest smear of radiance on a pane, the thin ghost of a light on the verge of extinction. The spaniel had slept a little in her arms, for the poor thing was exhausted. But now her grieving agitation fed Beauty's urgency, and as the girl pushed open the front door she saw, with a thrust of conscience, how the golden door knocker was thickly muffled in black crape. The door did not open silently as before, but with a doleful groaning of the hinges, and this time on to perfect darkness. Beauty clicked her gold cigarette lighter. The tapers in the chandelier had drowned in their own wax, and the prisms were wreathed with drifting arabesques of cobwebs. The flowers in the glass jars were dead, as if nobody had had the heart to replace them after she was gone. Dust everywhere, and it was cold. There was an air of exhaustion, of despair in the house, and worse, a kind of physical disillusion, as if its glamour had been sustained by a cheap conjuring trick, and now the conjurer, having failed to pull the crowds, had departed to try his luck elsewhere. Beauty found a candle to light her way and followed the faithful spaniel up the staircase, past the study, past her suite, through a house echoing with desertion, up a little back staircase dedicated to mice and spiders, stumbling, ripping the hem of her dress in her haste. What a modest bedroom! An attic with a sloping roof. They might have given the chambermaid if the beast had employed staff. A night light on the mantelpiece, no curtains at the windows, no carpet on the floor, and a narrow iron bedstead on which he lay, sadly diminished, his bulk scarcely disturbing the faded patchwork quilt, his mane a grayish rat's nest, and his eyes closed. On the stick-back chair where his clothes had been thrown, the roses she had sent him were thrust into the jug from the washstand, but they were all dead. The spaniel jumped up on the bed and burrowed her way under the scanty covers, softly keening. "Oh beast," said Beauty. "I have come home." His eyelids flickered. How was it she had never noticed before that his agate eyes were equipped with lids, like those of a man? Was it because she had only looked at her own face reflected there? "I'm dying, Beauty," he said in a cracked whisper of his former purr. "Since you left me I have been sick. I could not go hunting, I found I had not the stomach to kill the gentle beasts I could not eat. I am sick and I must die, but I shall die happy because you have come to say good-bye to me." She flung herself upon him so that the iron bedstead groaned, and covered his poor paws with her kisses. "Don't die, beast. If you'll have me I'll never leave you." When her lips touched the meat-hook claws, they drew back into their pads, and she saw how he had always kept his fists clenched, but now, painfully, tentatively, at last began to stretch his fingers. Her tears fell on his face like snow, and under their soft transformation, the bones showed through the pelt, the flesh through the wide, tawny brow. And then it was no longer a lion in her arms, but a man with an unkempt mane of hair, and how strange, a broken nose, such as the noses of retired boxers, that gave him a distant, heroic resemblance to the handsomest of all the beasts. "Do you know," said Mr. Lyon, "I think I might be able to manage a little breakfast today, Beauty, if you would eat something with me." Mr. and Mrs. Lyon walk in the garden. The old spaniel drowses on the grass, in a drift of fallen petals.